to Masculinity Unmasked podcast with hosts Max Wilson and Greg Styan.
Okay, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Masculinity Unmasked, the fortnightly conversation that delves deep into what it means to be a man in the 21st century. The topic of conversation for today's episode is No More Hiding, How to Live Life Your Way. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and fellow coach, Greg Styan. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Max.
And tonight we're very lucky to have with us a very interesting guest, Louise Lewis, who is a mindset, nervous system, and energetics expert. So, Louise, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about yourself and the sort of work that you do?
Yeah, and thanks both for having me. It's lovely to be here. So I am a coach, and I suppose if I was going to summarize it in a succinct way, I help people to awaken to the truth of all that they are, accept all of who they are, and then go out into the world and live the purpose that they were really born for, versus maybe what they got told they should be, what they think they should be, what society tells them they should be. And I use a variety of tools to do that. You said mindset, nervous system, energetics, various different things. But essentially, it's about how do you get to a place where you love and accept all of yourself and then feel safe to put all of that into the world to make the difference that you were uniquely here to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. We're going to delve into all of that, or attempt to delve into as much of that as possible in the chat today. And I know you've got a really interesting story of sort of how you went from hiding yourself to doing life your way. And so perhaps it's a good place to start is your personal story if you're happy to share.
Yeah, so I guess a key point for me was so I trained and worked as a tax lawyer for 10 years. Worked in London, climbed the corporate ranks, ticked all of those sort of traditional boxes of success. And in September 2018, I took a month's annual leave because I was really, really struggling, but was not quite yet prepared to say that I wasn't okay. So I took all of my annual leave in one go and was then subsequently signed off work with stress and never went back. But in the bin signed off work with stress, very much perfectionistic led, I made this promise to myself that I was going to do whatever it took so I never felt that bad again. And what I didn't realize at that point was what that was going to look like. So, alongside training to be a coach, and I thought I was going to be the traditional goal setting career coach, I started doing my own work and discovering more about myself. I had a coach that kept recommending trauma books to me. I was like, why does she keep recommending trauma books to me? Because I've never had any trauma. I was like, maybe it's for my clients. I don't really know. And then time passed, and I realized that there'd just been a lot going on in my life that had deeply, deeply impacted me. And the more I unraveled that, the more I realized I was, in fact, not here to be a traditional career coach because it's the stuff that goes on underneath the surface for people that really interests me and that I want to work with. And then over the last 7 years, there's been a real evolution of my work and my healing, spiritual awakening, which I now kind of see the burnout as. The burnout has been like this catalyst of it's time to wake up, love, what you're doing, um, which has led me to here.
Wow. Louise, what a powerful story. And thanks so much for sharing. There's one thing that I really picked up on, as we got to know each other through the week, as we talked before the podcast, as you talked about how you help your clients and your story, is this idea of conformity, where there's a psychological pressure to align with norms or authority. Is this the idea, the concept behind your witch's approach? I want to know more about that. Tell me more about where the idea come from, how it fits in with your coaching.
Yeah, so at the start of this year, I started talking a lot more about returning to the natural place, about witches, about the fact that I think we're kind of all witches, and really sharing more of that side of myself, which had been hidden for a long time, also from myself, right? Um, because it feels like a scary thing to talk about. But for me, if I take a step back and look at all of the ways that we are controlled, and we're told, we're told that success looks like a very intellectual, cognitive, mind-based path of work hard at school, go to university, study things, do as you're told, don't question authority, go into the workplace, play by the rules. If you want to succeed and be promoted, you have to play the political game, you have to do all of these different things. And it never quite sat right with me. And so the more of this work that I've done, the more I've opened up to a spiritual side, a witchy side, the more I think that when we move away from these layers of the rule book that gets handed to us and connect back into what I see as everybody's natural place, where we're intuitive, we've got these psychic gifts, things come through differently for different people. And we realize that we are so much more powerful than the systems and the conformity and the control suggest. We then get to this space of really recognizing, okay, I'm here for something that looks different. And I think so much of why this informs my work is there's so many people in these corporate jobs outwardly looking incredibly successful, doing arguably incredible things, getting paid a lot of money, but they kind of feel a bit dead and unfulfilled inside because they're not doing what they came here to do, because what they came here to do doesn't fit in that conformist societal systemic model of this is what you're supposed to do, this is how you're supposed to live your life.
Powerful stuff.
John,
Um, I know you're desperate there, Max, to jump in and ask a question for that, so I'll leave the floor to you.
I was say we've jumped straight in there in the deep end with conversations about witches, and people
Greg was well
listening
up
might
for it. Greg was
might
like,
be
we're
Oh, I
going
thinking,
in.
was. I
where's this
couldn't
coming
wait.
from?
I couldn't
So
wait to drop that in.
just to add a bit of context for those that are listening. So just before we came on, we were having a conversation around the work that Louise was just talking about there, and I imagine people listening in may hear the term witch and then switch off. This episode isn't for me. This I can't relate to anything that's being said here. So just rewinding, when we're talking about the term witch, and I know you've done severe explanation of the work that you do, what exactly is it that you are referring to? How would you define what a modern day witch is for those that are listening?
Okay. Yeah, and so this is going to differ for everyone, right? But my personal definition of a witch, when I think about witches, it is a person, and it can be a male or a female, who is connected to their body, right? Most of us, the way we live our lives, we spend all of our times in all of our time in our heads. We're deeply disconnected from our body and the body
Mm.
wisdom, okay? And that might be from unresolved trauma or nervous system dysregulation or whatever it is. And so for me, a witch is someone who is connected into their body, feels connected to nature. I've got crystals and stuff in the background. They may feel connected to things like crystals, but it's like natural things.
Mm.
They might pay attention to what's going on in with the moon or with astrology. Um, but it's very much for me just this returning to the natural place of how we were supposed to live our lives.
Mm.
How we were naturally born and designed to live our lives and what is available to us in that place. Because, if I get a feeling or a sense that I can't cognitively explain, well, if I'm disconnected from my body, I'm not going to get that feeling and that sense
Mm.
to begin with. But if I'm not really in tune with my body, I'm not going to be able to pay attention to it and hear and understand that. And so then I'm so cut off from the full extent of the wisdom that's available to me because I'm only in my mind. And so it's about that deeper connection to all that is. And that probably also has a spiritual element. Whether that connection is to nature and the seasons and the moon, whether it's more the spirit world, whether it's a god, whether it's universe, like whatever that looks like, it's just this bigger space than the teeny tiny box that we all get told is the safe conformist box to live from. Now, I
Mm.
think sometimes when people think of witches, they think of like the old wizened woman around the cauldron, or like I've had some comments from people on LinkedIn of like, oh, please don't turn me into a toad. But that's not really what I mean. And I'm sure there is also a like, and then also I think there can be this connotation that witches are evil or bad or they're here to do bad things.
Mm.
Um, well, that's certainly not my approach. And the people that I've spoken to who also consider themselves as witches, it's not their approach either.
Mm.
It's really about how do we use everything that's available to us. And that might also look like manifestation, which is far more simple. Right, that's not some kind of like magical thing, but I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but that for me is a witch.
Yeah.
We're just deeply connected. We're just embodied. Like we're in our bodies. We can feel our feelings. We can move through anything. But then we can also connect into the wisdom of, I'll just say the cosmos, right? As a guide for life. So for me, one of my greatest tools is my dreams, right? So I get guidance for my life through my dreams. Now that's not normal,
Mm.
but that for me is kind of part of being a witch. And other people would term it differently. Witch is for me is just it's just an easy terminology that people kind of get or not.
Yeah. Well, we're sort
Wow.
of conditioned to stay in our heads, aren't we? And then suddenly some of us realize that we can drop into our bodies, and then we can realize we've got feelings and emotions and we can be intuitive there. And then some of us go even further and realize that outside of our bodies there's intelligence that we can tap into. It's like a process that we can go through. And I guess it's the end, sort of towards the end stage of that journeying, isn't it? To realize that actually we're not in this just vehicle. There is other stuff that we can tap into, this intelligence that can guide us. That's what I'm.
Yeah, and that's going to look different for everyone. But for me, it definitely was a journey like that. So if I go back to 2018, there was a director in the office that used to talk about the fact that we all needed better boundaries. And I was like, what is this lady on about with boundaries? So
Mm.
2018, I don't know what boundaries are. I start seeing a therapist, I start doing some coaching. The therapist talks about the fact that my family is very dysfunctional and that's not healthy. So that starts to unravel some of that. And then I look into childhood trauma. And I then have all of this cognitive understanding of everything that happened that got me to there. I didn't feel very much different. It was like, well, I understand it all now, but like my patterns aren't changing. I'm still ostensibly the same person. And then I discovered nervous system work and body work. And I was so deeply disconnected from my body that the very basics of like even just the tapping on the back of your hand and looking at your hand, this is my hand, is part of my body. It's like one of those real basic, like, how do
Mm.
you start to get into your body? I would dissociate when I did that because I couldn't be in my body. It was so intense. It was so hard for me. Or even the thing of like, just hold yourself and feel how it is to hold yourself.
Mm.
It felt horrendous. Felt horrendous. I couldn't do it. Um, and so over time, I then was more able to be in my body. And then, like you say, greater things opened up. But I did a retreat last year or a couple of years ago with the coach that I started working with in 2019 and said to her, well, I've always been quite spiritually curious. And she laughed. She was like, you have not been spiritually curious. She was like, you are one of the most spiritually closed, you were one of the most spiritually closed off people that I have ever worked with. So it's very much been an evolution as my nervous system became more regulated, as I was more able to feel, I was able to be more connected to my body. This other stuff opened up. It wasn't like one day all of a sudden I left law and then this happened. I think that does happen to some people that they talk about the dark night of the soul, but for me, it was a much more progressive experience.
Mm.
That if you'd said to me 7 years ago, you're going to be sitting on a podcast talking about witches, I'd have laughed in your face.
Mm.
Brilliant. I absolutely love that. And I love the witches concept and the spirit, the being spiritual around it. There's one thing that we were talking about before we come on, and I think it'd be a good topic to address. There's something going on. Me and Max speak to guests every other week, and there's a common theme. I know I coined it, or it's been coined as the Great Awakening, but it's much more than that. There's something going on, and that makes me think about witches. Where I live in Essex, we're not far from Froggershall. It's where one of the most famous witch trials were. And I was telling you about Ergot, where Ergot, had hallucinogenic um, aspects to it, and was that a great awakening? Are we going through something similar now, where DMT? We were talking about a frog venom before we come on. Are people becoming? As people become more interested in this, are we going through something similar? Because what happened after the witch trials was a silencing, the post-Salem reckoning, dogma, authority. So Louise, I know you love conspiracies. What's going on? Tell us more about that. Is there a great awakening? Is this something to do with it? How does this link with your witches concept?
So I think there is a great awakening, and I think whilst in some spaces and for some people the great awakening might be being supported by hallucinogenics, herbal plants, whatever, I think it's kind of happening anyway. Um, and I think we are at a real pivotal point in humanity. And this will either make sense to people because they'll be like, oh, yes, I can feel it, something is going on, or it won't, right? But there is a something, and whether it is because we are on the verge of New Earth, if you look at the astrology, we've just entered the age of Aquarius. If you look at numerology, we're in a 9 year, which is all about things breaking down. But there is for sure a something, okay? And I believe in reincarnation. So I believe that we are souls having a human experience and that we've had lives before. And I think that many people have chosen or been sent or been called to reincarnate at this time to help with whatever this great collective awakening is. And where this feeds into the Wealthy Witches program is I think there's a lot of people out there that have this sense that they have a greater mission, a purpose. There's an impact that they're meant to be having, and they can sense it and they can feel it, and they might know what it is, or they can't quite tap into it. But because of, what has happened to witches in the past, what's happened to women in the past, what's happened to men in the past, there's like a part of them where it doesn't really quite feel safe to be seen and to be visible. And so what they aren't doing is fulfilling the mission that they came here to fulfill. And so the whole point of the Wealthy Witches Mastermind is to take people through a process and a journey of connecting into their mission, but also working through things like the witch runes around money, around visibility, around power, around, the fears, all of the different things that go on, and how this connects into what we can call conspiracy theories. Though, as people who are into conspiracy theories always like to remind me, conspiracy theory was a term coined by the FBI after JFK died to try and put shade on people that were like, should we look into this in more detail? Is that we have been suppressed and oppressed for a long, long time. And women have been, I know it's happened to men as well, but from the context of like women have been villainized. So we were talking before about even in the Bible, you've got the story of Adam and Eve, and there's Eve there tempting Adam to eat the forbidden fruit, which apparently was the whole downfall of humanity. And then if you look at the way witches were treated, like a lot of so-called, like some of them might have been actual witches, but a lot of them were just like they were the medicine women, they were the midwives, they were the mothers, they were doing all of these things, but they were dangerous because they were connected to their intuition and their power. Because the thing is, when you have access to your own mind, when you can think for yourself, when you can feel, when you actually trust your intuition, all of the nonsense that gets fed to you that's designed to make us fearful and controlled and to do as we're told and to stay on the treadmill of life, it can't work anymore. because we see through the veil, we see through the control, and it's like, well, no. And so I think there is it's almost like a reclamation and a remembering of like, actually, we're so much more powerful than we've been led to believe for a very, very long time. I saw a stat recently. I might mess this up, but it's along the lines of our conscious brain, or like our consciousness in the daytime, uses like 5% of our brain's capacity. Well, what happens if we can tap into the other 95%? Not necessarily even all of the 95%, and what's in that other 95%? Um, so that's really what a lot of this is about. It's that reclamation, it's that remembering, it's that pushing away all of the societal systems and norms, and we can call it a conspiracy theory. Someone said to me on my podcast recently, the greatest conspiracy that there is that we've been made to forget how powerful we are. And I believe that.
I love that.
Love
I
that.
can see Max in deep thought there. Wow, that was so powerful. And that interesting thought about we've forgotten something. I know I was questioning you about Egypt, and we spoke about that to a few other guests. So I love that. There has been something forgotten for sure, and we are much more powerful than we ever know. But Louise, thank you for sharing that. That was amazing. Max, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, we come back to a topic, right? This hiding from self and then moving to a place where we're doing life our way. This is an example of that, right? Even declaring spirituality or interest in the things that you've been talking about, Louise, it is a taboo in a lot of quarters still. Um,
Yeah.
and that's the challenge, right? We're not taught this stuff at school. We're not taught that it's okay to explore beyond what we're given. And I think looking at all of this from that macro level, that's what we're saying here, right? We're given all these scripts, we're giving all this conditioning, we're giving all this stuff to digest and embody, but actually we're never taught to question. And it takes a pain point for most of us to reach that realization that actually, like you said, lifting the veil back, there's more to this than we've been told. And that can be quite a scary journey to go on. And that's why it's so great the work that you do. I'm just thinking some people might be listening to this and thinking, okay, well, I'm not there, right? If they've made it this far in the podcast with all the stuff that we're talking, but they're thinking, I'm not there yet, or I can't relate to that side, but I can relate to being burnt out, wanting more, being fed up, this pull to something else. What do I do? Where do I go from here? And there's people along the journey, right? So I'm just thinking of those people that are at the beginning of that journey. What would be your sort of advice to them?
Great question. And I think and wherever you are in the journey, I think it's also really important just to say that it's so important to honor yourself where you are. There's no point comparing one person's journey to another person's journey. But if I think back to, you know, more of the start, things that either were helpful for me or would have been helpful for me was this, I had this deep knowing inside me that I was meant to do something else. And I trusted that. Okay. Some of that was blind naivety, right? But I knew inside that there was something else that I was meant to be doing. And so if you have that feeling, it's about trusting that, I would say, and then starting to follow the nudges. Now, I obviously was not following body-based nudges back then because I was disconnected from my body. But I knew, for example, in the work that I did, that the bit I enjoyed the most was working with people, right? And helping the team to flourish. And then I just happened to have a conversation with my sister one day who had a coach, and she said, "Well, what about coaching?" And so it's being curious when you start to have these conversations, when you start to look at, okay, well, what is it that I enjoy? And even that in and of itself at that point can be so, so challenging because for many, many people, and I know because I was one of them, you don't know what you enjoy and you don't even know who you are because you've given your entire life to work or something else and you've kind of chipped away at who you are over the years.
Mm.
And so it's really getting back to that place of also starting to question, well, what is it that I enjoy? Or what is it that I need? And it sounds so basic, but it's little things like, am I tired? Okay, well, maybe could I rest? Am I thirsty? Do I need to go to the bathroom? All of these little things just to start reconnecting back into who you are, what you want, and then being really, really curious. And then without trying to put pressure on it or like, I need to sort this out immediately. I need to get out of this job. I need to find my purpose straight away. It's like,
Mm.
can you just let it evolve and unfold? But perhaps just putting you and your health a little bit further up the list so that you're taking care of yourself as you evolve and do this stuff. And because it is all a very natural, it's all a very natural progression if you allow it to be.
Yeah,
Wow.
relate to a lot of that.
Fascinating stuff. I'm desperate to know more about the witches, Max, but I might I might hold that for a different conversation. Louise, it sounds like like you talked about going back to thinking about the root causes of this, like a root cause analysis. That's a good place I start with um, all of the clients that I work with as well for a deep reflection. Is there a way that you would do it? Is there like an app? Method that you would use for this sort of like root cause analysis?
Um, so I don't necessarily like following particular formulas, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's more about just getting to understand the person, and then maybe this is just kind of my witchy side. I can tell the root cause very, very quickly. Like, so for me, I call it a core wound. My core wound is I'm difficult to love and I'm hard to be around and I'm unlovable, right? And so many of my life choices were built around trying to either make sure other people didn't realize that I was unlovable or difficult to love, or trying to prove my worth and my right to exist to feel good enough, right? And a lot of people have got similar core wounds or underlying things going on. So there isn't necessarily like go and look at this app or do this other thing. Um, but again, it's just, I think it's just be curious, but I think we know, like a lot of people are like, my dad couldn't love me. So, if my mum couldn't love me, or like they've been like their parents have divorced. And so there's this stuff going on in the underneath of like, I'm just not good enough. I wasn't good enough for them to stay around or whatever it was. But it always generally comes down to I'm not enough. This part of me is bad. This part of me is wrong. I've been told that this part of me is bad and wrong. So I need to push this thing down. I need to hide this thing. And I need to then create this persona of myself that is going to be palatable to the world. So Gabor Mate talks about the conflict between authenticity and attachment. So who is my authentic self versus who do I need to be in order to be accepted by others? Um, but it doesn't, I actually don't know if this is a gift that I have or if it's just really obvious for other people. But for me, it just becomes very apparent very quickly. But one of the things that I've been told is because I'm so open and real and raw and vulnerable in my work, people feel very safe then to just open up to me straight away. So it doesn't take a long time to get to the root cause.
Mm. Yeah, there's so much power in that modeling of vulnerability, isn't there? When we've lived masked for so long,
Yeah.
to model that vulnerability, that space for people to be. I can relate to that with receiving coaching therapy myself, but also offering coaching to others, providing that space. There's a lot of power in that. So there's so much we could delve into and talk about, a lot more today. It's been a really interesting chat. We've gone in lots of different directions with it. Is there any final takeaways that you would want to offer the listeners, Louise? And I'll come to you, Greg, as well.
Yes, if I was going to offer one takeaway, it's whatever your version of this looks like, start to really, really pay attention to where life is trying to lead you. Like if you know in your heart that there's other stuff that you're meant to be doing, try and look past the fears and the I can't do this or it's impossible or I can't make money doing that and
Mm.
just start to follow the nudges. And the second thing is always put yourself first. I'm sorry, it's not selfish. Always put yourself first. Prioritize your health above everything else. Remember that your health is multifaceted, because you can have a zillion problems until you have a health problem, and then you have only one problem. So that would be my big takeaways. Take care of yourself, follow the nudges.
Yeah,
Wow.
love that. And I reframed that the other day with somebody. It was in a group. It was in a group session, and we changed the term selfish to self-full. How can I nourish myself and fill my
Yeah.
cup? How can I be self-full? And I thought, I'm onto something here, and I Googled it, and somebody else had already come up with that term. Greg, any final thoughts before we finish up?
Yeah, there was one. I think I picked up on something that both of you said there, and I really got it from that root cause analysis answer that you give, Louise. Is I think we live in a society now where everyone wants something quickly. The idea of an app, the idea of having that quick confirmation there and then. But actually, with something like this, like vulnerability, it takes time, doesn't it? A much deeper dive. You talked about is following the nudges. I love that. And I think that's the real power of coaching as well, especially having someone help you and guide you from the outside in, is to find that way. And it's not a quick fix. Louise, such a real powerful message that you've got. And the fascinating for me, Max, is that everyone that we speak to, whilst everyone's story is different, we're all picking up on the same vibe, that there's something going on, that there's a change that and I don't think the change is all bad. I think that I said this in the last podcast. I think there's lots of positives. People are becoming more open to this, more comfortable with being spiritual. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an awakening of sorts going on, isn't it? People are waking up to wanting more. Well, thank you both very much for delving into this. It has been a really interesting chat, and thanks for everyone who has been listening. Louise, if people want to get in touch with you, we're going to pop your details in the show notes, but do you just want to quickly say what's the best way?
Yeah, I mean, I would say send me a message on any social media platform. I'm very approachable. I'm happy to help. If there's stuff that I've talked about today that you've got questions about, come and ask me. The website will be there as well, and there's tons of free stuff on there that you can dive into as well if you want to know more. And I just want to say thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having you on, Louise. It's been really interesting. And if people resonate with the topic, you're interested in reaching out and chatting further, you can contact us. We can put you in contact with Louise as well. And I am sad to say that's the end of the first season of Masculinity Unmasked, but we plan on starting up a second season. Greg is moving to Vietnam, and yeah, we plan to take stock and a revival at some point in the foreseeable. But I hope everyone has enjoyed the podcast series so far, and yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts on topics for the next season. Thank you very much, both, and take care. Cheers.
Thank you.